Hey there, guys. My name's Greg, and I just finished a almost year-long traveling expedition across North America. Just a huge road trip. I did a weekly vlog about it, so it ended up being 40 weeks of videos. I just got home 2 weeks ago, so I thought I'd make one last video just talking about my favorite parts of the journey, my least favorite parts of the journey, some of the things that I liked and didn't like, look at some of the numbers, etc. So this is that video. So let's jump in. The whole idea started with this. I wanted to go on a road trip, and I wanted to see all the Canadian provinces, all the Canadian territories, so 10 Canadian provinces, 3 Canadian territories, and every U.S. state except Hawaii, so 49 U.S. states. And I wanted to do this all without spending any money on accommodations. So what I did was I lived out of my car. I converted my SUV into a camper, and that was my home for 9.5 months. So just a quick look at the numbers. So I was on the road for 281 days. Of those 281 days, I had 33 days where I actually had a place to stay, so I wasn't sleeping in the car. And most of those were just, old friends and family that I have throughout the continent. I drove 62,112.6 kilometers, which is equivalent to 38,595 miles. And I had 6 flat tires. And the places that like the areas where I actually had a place to stay and I wasn't sleeping in the car were Panorama in BC, Edmonton in Alberta, Ottawa in Ontario, Montreal in Quebec, Halifax in Nova Scotia, Chicago in Illinois, and San Clemente in California. And then again, Panorama in British Columbia on the way back home. And as I said, most of those were just family and friends, just scattered throughout the continent. It was always nice to have a place to stay because living out of a car can get difficult. It can get frustrating, but it was one hell of an experience. So basically, I'm just gonna talk about stuff. I have a list of things that I want to talk about, but I didn't script any of this. So basically, this is gonna be kind of like a me talking video with pretty much no structure. So one of the questions I get the most is, what made you want to do this trip? And I actually have a really good answer for that. So I graduated from university about 2 years ago now, and I worked for a year and saved up for a year. Right after I graduated and before I started working, I did a little bit of traveling. So I went to Asia first. I went to Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. It was my first time ever being overseas, and it was a blast, and I loved it. And I remember being in Thailand, and I was on this bike trip, like a motorbike trip, those little Asia bikes that they have, like those 50cc little dinghy things. So I was on the road for like 8 hours driving down like the western side of Thailand. And it was during that day where I kind of thought to myself, I was like, man, I feel like I've seen more of Thailand than I have of Canada, which is where I'm from. Granted, Canada's a much bigger country. But that always stuck with me. It's like, man, I should really see more of Canada before I see the rest of the world, because that's home, right? And then, so I spent 5 weeks in Asia, and then I got home. I came home, and then I went on a 3-week road trip to Chicago and to California, because I have friends that live in Chicago and California. So that was kind of like, a few days down to Chicago, and then I drove Route 66 down to California, near Los Angeles, and then drove the coast almost all the way back up, and then came home. And it was during that trip where I was kind of just thinking to myself, like, I wish I could spend 5 days in each of these places instead of one day, because I was seeing a lot of cool stuff. And it was my first like big road trip that I've ever done by myself. I was like, man, I wish I could stay here for longer, or do this for longer, or just see more of things. So those two experiences combined, my Asia trip and that road trip that I did, kind of made me think it's like I should just do a huge road trip through all of Canada and the United States, because that's like, I mean, I'm from Canada, but the United States is just, it's, the southern neighbor. It doesn't feel like you're too far from Canada when you're in the United States. They're very different countries, but they're also really similar. The feel isn't entirely different, right? So I decided, that's what feels like home. So I want to see all of it. And so that's what prompted this trip. So I saved up for a year working, and then it was like, let's go do this trip. So I bought a car. I converted it into a camper. If you want to take a look at my camper, I'll put the link in the description. It's just me talking about my car for 5 minutes, really. But it was great. Like I bought this car, and I was just in my garage for a month, kind of making ideas and figuring out how to do it. And it was my first real woodworking project also. So I made like a bed platform, and I had like the bed, and I put an extra battery in, so it was like a bed, and I had like a fridge and like a pull-out stove and like kitchen cabinet, and it ended up working out beautifully. I loved, like, it really felt like home. And the interesting thing about living in a car, at least for me, was it's not, and it's an SUV, it's not a van. It's not big, you don't have a lot of room. The only seat I would ever sit in was when I'm driving, like the front seat. So like it was usually like you're either driving or you're in bed, and most of the time you're just outside. Essentially, I was living outside, right? That's really what it felt like. But there was that sense of when you're out for a whole day, like let's say I'm in a city and I go out and I explore the city, or I go on like a day-long hike. I did a lot of hiking when I was on the road. I'd come back to my car at the end of the day, and it felt homey. You know that feeling when you get home at the end of a long day and it's like, oh, I'm finally home, and it's comforting. I did have that sensation living in a car, and I loved that. You get home and it's like nice, it's relaxing, it's comfortable, it's familiar. So I didn't really feel like I missed out on having a home. I didn't feel homeless. I was houseless. So yeah, living in a car was quite the experience, though. It was not easy, especially, as I said, you're basically living outside, so you're kind of at the whim of whatever Mother Nature wants to throw at you. I dealt with winter storms. I didn't deal with too much heat, which was nice. I kind of planned out my trip so I would hit like the northern part of the continent in the summer, and then most of the south happened in the winter. So it worked out really well. Like I planned it out really well, is what I mean. And so yeah, I didn't have to deal with too much heat. The hottest day I had was in December in Florida, near the Everglades, and I hit 34 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. And the coldest day I had was negative 24 degrees Celsius in Colorado in January. Although that's just like when I say those like 34 degrees and negative 24 degrees, that's literally what my car like thermometer said. So during the day it might have got hotter, and during the night, especially in Colorado, it probably got less than negative 24 degrees. But those are the two numbers, the hottest and coldest that my car saw, or that at least I saw on my car thermometer. See, I didn't really have to deal with too much heat. I did deal with the cold, though. Negative 20 for me is like pretty cold, especially when you're sleeping in a car without any heat. I had a down sleeping bag, which was awesome. But waking up in the morning always sucked on a cold day, because it's like I'm all comfortable in my sleeping bag, and I'd have like my computer right next to me, because normally I would like watch an episode of something before I went to sleep, but it's frozen from the night. My phone is telling me, heat up phone, the battery temperature's too cold. So like everything else in the car would freeze except for me. And then I'd have to get up and like, you know, once you're up, you're up. You know, there's no like, once I would get up, it's like, well, I'm not going back to bed, you know, because you're outside. You know, there are things to do. So getting up in the morning always kind of sucked because it takes about 5 to 7 minutes to set my car up for driving. And it takes about 5 to 7 minutes to set it up for sleeping, right? Like there's a sleep mode where everything's set up differently. And there's a driving mode where everything's set up differently because I have to move the seats forward and other stuff, put the window coverings in, etc. You can watch my video on my conversion if you're actually interested in seeing the difference. I dealt with tornadoes in Ottawa. I arrived in Ottawa right as the tornadoes hit would have been September. So that was interesting. I dodged hurricane season in the southern United States, which was lucky because Florida and the Carolinas both got hit by hurricanes this past year, which would have been 2018. And I got there just shortly after. You know, it was about a month or two after all that happened. So that was nice. I didn't have to deal with any hurricanes. I dealt with crazy snowstorms in Minnesota and in South Dakota. Yeah. So weather-wise, I guess like I was lucky. You know, there was a lot that I didn't have to deal with. But when you are dealing with the weather, like every day, you know, I don't have like a house to hide out in. When you're dealing with the weather every day, it's not easy. You know, it gets strenuous, it gets annoying. Cooking, because when I'm cooking, I had to be outside because I had like a camp stove. So cooking outside could always pose a challenge, especially if it's cold. It takes like forever to get a pot or a pan to heat up, which can definitely be frustrating. So that kind of sucked. Let me just just try and keep myself on track here. Okay, so some of my favorite areas of the continent. My favorite provinces were British Columbia and Newfoundland and Labrador. Emphasis on the Newfoundland and Labrador because they're two separate entities under the same government, basically. And Newfoundland was amazing. Labrador was awesome only because it has the Trans-Labrador Highway, which is like this incredibly remote, super fun road trip. And then British Columbia I liked almost for the same reasons. Like I was driving up north through British Columbia to get to the Yukon, and it was just like camping was just so much fun, and the roads just get more and more remote, really. It's like you just feel more and more out in the middle of nowhere as you head north through British Columbia. My favorite territory was the Yukon, only because I barely saw none of it. I forget which week the video is, but I literally got to none of it on a technicality. Like I swam over from Quebec because all the islands in James Bay and Hudson's Bay are considered Nunavut territory, because there are no roads to Nunavut in the summer, and you have to drive this crazy ice road to get to Nunavut in the wintertime. So that was not for me. So I barely saw Nunavut, so I don't really have much of an opinion on Nunavut. But Northwest Territories was really flat. And it really just felt like an extension of Alberta. Like it goes from like prairies into, I guess, it's kind of like the tundra. But it didn't even really feel like, because there's still trees. So it didn't feel like, no, it wasn't tundra. Like I didn't see tundra, I don't think, in the Northwest Territories. But it's just really flat, and it's not that exciting. There's like cool wildlife, of course, as all over the north. There's lots of interesting wildlife. And not even like lots of wildlife that I hadn't seen before, but there's just so much of it. Like you see it every day, all the time, at least in the summertime when I was up there. But Yukon had mountains and valleys and rivers, and it was beautiful. I guess what I would say is like Northwest Territories felt like an extension of Alberta. And except for the Rocky Mountains in the southwest part of Alberta, Alberta's pretty flat and boring. And Yukon felt like an extension of British Columbia, and BC's awesome. It's like there's all these crazy forests and mountains, and it's just like British Columbia. I love everything from like the north to the Okanagan to everything in between. It's just beautiful. It's just like it's incredible. Not to say that the prairies aren't beautiful, because I try my best not to say, oh, this is more beautiful than that. But the prairies, I guess I'm just so used to them, and I guess they get old quicker. Like if someone from like a tropical region or something came to the prairies and saw these really open, flat wheat fields, they would probably be pretty amazed, and they would think it's, wow, it's so beautiful. But that's it, like after you're used to them, there's very little like new experiences you can have with them. Whereas in British Columbia, it's like you're always heading over the next mountain and getting the next incredible view of this or that. It's more diverse. There's more variety of beauty in BC and Yukon than there is in Alberta and Northwest Territories. That's what I was looking for. And then my favorite states were Alaska and California. So the extreme Northwest and the extreme Southwest, both for very different reasons. Alaska I love because it's just so untouched by humans. You really, like, it sounds so cliche, but how you feel at one with nature or whatever. You really do start to feel more like you're just part of the ecosystem. If it wasn't for the road in front of you, you'd be in the middle of the wilderness. Like that's the only, like for a lot of my time in Alaska, it's like the road is it's like that's the only sign of society or civilization, which is a really cool feeling to me. Especially when I drove like the Dalton Highway, which was, just an incredible road up north. It's like probably the most remote road that I drove, and the most dangerous road that I drove. But like it just like you take away any other cars on the road, and you take away the road, and you just be in the middle of like you wouldn't see any sign of civilization for hundreds of kilometers in each way, which is really, really a cool feeling. And then California I love just because it just feels like paradise. I love the beaches. It's warm, palm trees. There's something about palm trees I just love. Like they're just so amazing. And I really like the people in California. Like it's just such a laid back area. There's lots of skater dudes and hippie vans, and just it was really easy to talk to people, and people seem like they want to talk to each other in California. It's hard to be in a bad mood in California, I guess would be the best way to put it. And I also love inland California. Like, I talk about the beach, obviously, and, how beautiful it is and amazing. But the desert, I spent some time in the Mojave Desert. And, like, inland California is also just amazing. I love it. And then also, like, up further north through California, like San Francisco. I've also been to, not on this trip, but I've been to San Jose and Sacramento before, just for like a day each. But I don't know, just something about California. Californians seem to just have a way about them. I like it in California. My third favorite state, following closely behind Alaska and California, would probably be Utah. Utah was amazing. It's just so unique in the rock structures, and just it's just something that, like, it feels so foreign, it's like, wow, here's these crazy rock structures. There's not a lot of trees around here. And I did a lot of hiking in Utah. I saw all 5 national parks. I was also there in the wintertime, so but it's Utah, like you're in the desert pretty much, but it was winter, so it was like seeing the snow in like Bryce Canyon and Arches National Park was really cool. It's not typically what people think of when they think of Utah. You think of, like, when you first think of it, you think of it in the summertime. All these cool rocks and whatnot. So yeah, and then my favorite cities. My favorite city in Canada was definitely St. John's. Probably just because I had an incredible experience there. But I went out on George Street on like a Tuesday night, and the amount of people I met, and it was just like everyone wanted to be your friend, and that Newfie accent, oh, I love it. And it was also one of those nights that I was in St. John's was legalization day for marijuana in Canada, so that was like a really huge celebration. They had the midnight celebration, the first Canadian to buy marijuana. I was like probably the 20th or 25th Canadian to buy legal marijuana, so it was just a really cool experience. And the only reason that happened in Newfoundland is because that's in the most eastern time zone. So they hit October 17th before the rest of Canada. So it's a really interesting time to be there. But everyone was just so nice in St. John's. And Newfoundland itself is just beautiful. Grossmorn National Park was incredible. I hiked up Grossmorn Mountain. But anyways, back to favorite cities. Yeah, my favorite city in Canada was St. John's. My favorite big city in Canada would have either been, because St. John's is only like 100,000 people, my favorite like big city would have been either Ottawa or Montreal. Ottawa's about 1 million people. Montreal's like over 2 million people. But yeah, loved both of them. And then my favorite city in the United States was New York City. Surprisingly, because most of the time I'm not a huge fan of big cities. I hate Los Angeles. I hate Toronto. Like most of the time I'm just like, I prefer the small town vibe to the big city vibe. But New York City was just special. It was just amazing. It's the people watching capital of the world as far as I'm concerned. Like, it's just like, people always, like, I've heard stereotypes about people from New York. But like my experience there was, it was just the hardest place to give a stereotype to, because there's so many people that it's so diverse, Like, people say New Yorkers are rude, or New Yorkers are this, New Yorkers are this, blah, blah, blah. But like, I met some incredibly nice people in New York, some incredibly rude people in New York, some incredibly old, some incredibly young, some incredibly stupid, some incredibly intelligent. Like, it's just like, there's just this incredible, huge umbrella of people that it's just like, it just feels astonishing that there's a place like that in the world. Yeah, I loved it there. It was absolutely mind-blowing. I remember driving into the Bronx and then taking the subway to Manhattan and getting off at Times Square, like the station at Times Square, and just like walking up the stairs into Times Square, and it's just like this sensory overload of just all these lights and people, and it's true what they say. It's like the business capital of the world, the cultural capital of the world. It's like the everything capital of the world. Like, they just have everything in New York. There's so much going on. I spent 3 nights in New York, and I feel like I saw like most of the touristy stuff. Statue of Liberty, Empire State Building, blah blah blah. But and I saw all 5 boroughs, which was kind of cool. But I feel like I could have spent a year in New York and not run out of stuff to do. Like, because you walk down the street, I went into like a bar and you just meet someone and they'll go do something else. And it's just like, you're always, it's just an adventure being there. It was really, really cool. Like, literally just taking the New York subway is such a crazy experience. If you're not from New York, I guess. Like, if for New Yorkers, it's not a crazy experience. But like, it was just a really, really, really cool time. I'm glad I did New York by myself as well. I'm glad I was there alone. Because it just, when you're alone, you're more opened up to meeting people. You know, you're more like, you're not, if I was there with a friend, I'd be talking to my friend the whole time. But when I'm alone, it's like you're more opened up to having new experiences and whatnot. And New York was a place that I was definitely glad. I was definitely glad to be alone there. So yeah, New York was incredible. I also love Chicago. I've been to Chicago 3 times now, though, and I have a friend that lives there. But Chicago is definitely one of my favorite American cities as well. And then Southern California, just the entirety of Southern California. San Diego was also one of my favorite American cities. Actually, if I was going to make like a top 4 American cities, it would go New York, Chicago, and then these two would kind of be tied, San Diego and New Orleans. Those would be like my top 4 American cities. New Orleans was also just such a party, and just so much fun, you know. And I was there with a friend, and that's a place that I want to be with a friend. New York is a place that I definitely want to be alone. It's just, and it just worked out that way. That I had a friend fly in to see me, and we did New Orleans together. So that was just such a party, so much fun, and so much music. New Orleans is just a party centered entirely around music. So if you're a music fan, specifically jazz, blues, but like specifically jazz, if you like jazz music, New Orleans is the place to be. And I'm a huge music fan. So what else we got here? Yeah, so this is the longest expedition I've ever been traveling. I've never, left home for more than, I guess, 5 or 6 weeks, and this was 9.5 months. So it was a long time. But I've only been backpacking one time in Asia, but it's very interesting how different the 2 forms of traveling are: road tripping and backpacking, which are really the only 2 forms of traveling that I'm familiar with. I've never done the thing where you stay in fancy hotels and take guided tours and stuff. I've been backpacking and I've been road tripping. They're different, and I love both of them, but for very different reasons. When I'm road tripping, you meet less people when you're road tripping, especially in North America, because, it's not a bad thing, but in Canada and the USA, people do their best not to talk to strangers for the most part. You don't typically just strike up a conversation with a stranger. And I was a stranger to everyone, and most of the people that I was meeting were locals, if I did meet them. Where I met most people would be camping. It was actually interesting because I met a lot of what I would call nice people, because they see me camping alone and they'll invite me over to their fire. And I always really, really respected that. It's like, oh, that guy's just by himself, let's invite him over to the fire. And so I met a lot of people that way. But when you're backpacking, at least when I was backpacking in Asia, and you're staying in the hostels, everyone's from not there. So you just meet everyone else traveling in that country. So you meet an absurd amount of people in a day. When you're backpacking, road tripping is very different. I spent a lot of days and nights just by myself. But you're also more free on a road trip. You can go wherever you want to go. You can do whatever you want to do. It just feels like the only restrictions are where the roads go. Does a road go there? No, then I can't go there. But if a road goes there, I can go there. So that's a lot of fun. For example, 99% of Canada is pretty much uninhabitable land. So you can't go there. At least you can't drive there. Lots of places in Canada you can't go at all. You can't fly there, you can't boat there, because there's no place to land a plane, there's no docks or anything, so you can't get there. But then there's a lot more places in Canada that are inhabited, but you can't drive there. There's no road up there. One really famous spot is the Churchill area in Manitoba. It's where people go to see polar bears. can't drive there. You know, I would love to go there, but you can't drive there. So this is, in Canada, you really notice when you do a road trip like this, you realize just how spread out the country is and how far away everything is and how much you just can't get to, you know. Yes, that's my favorite Canadian city, my favorite American cities, favorite states, favorite province, favorite territory. My favorite roads, like my favorite roads that I drove, were the Dalton Highway in Alaska. That'd be my number one craziest road trip that I've done. Most dangerous for sure as well. If you ever drive that road, you should probably have an SUV or a truck. It's pretty rough, pretty crazy. I only got one flat tire, thank God. And it was, reaching the Arctic Ocean, which was really cool. Oh, that's another thing. I swam in every major body of water surrounding North America, surrounding our two countries at least, because I didn't go to Mexico. But just give me a second here. I'm just going to look at the maps, because I swam in the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, including the Gulf of St. Lawrence. I swam in James Bay, not Hudson's Bay, but they are connected, so whatever. And then I swam in like the main part of the Arctic Ocean in Alaska. And I swam in the Gulf of Mexico. So it was kind of like every major ocean body surrounding the two countries, at least that I could get to, I swam in. So that was, it's good. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the Dalton Highway. Dalton Highway is the road trip of a lifetime, absolutely. Not for everyone. You have to really be committed to drive that road. It's remote, it's dangerous. You got to make sure you got your emergency supplies and your spare tires and blah, blah, blah. But holy crap, so much fun. I think the tundra in the Arctic feels like the most foreign place I've ever been, including like the jungles in Asia, because there's no trees, which was just so interesting to me. Because even like the desert in the American Southwest, the elevated parts have trees. Like there's always, like, you're usually looking at mountains when you're in the desert, and it's like at the tops of those mountains there's trees, and even like on the main part of the desert, like there's Joshua trees and stuff, and the Mojave, and like there's just vegetation, like there's shrubs and trees around in New Mexico and Arizona. Less than forests, obviously, but they exist. Like they're, wherever you're standing, it's like you can probably spot a tree somewhere in the desert most of the time. In the prairies, and like in the United States, you guys call them the plains, the Great Plains. It's a lot of wheat fields and grassy areas, but there are trees. Like when you drive through Saskatchewan or North Dakota, it's like it's super flat, but there's trees still. Not a lot of trees, but there's trees. And the Arctic tundra, no trees. Like you can't see any trees. And that's why it just felt so foreign to me. It was I think it was the most open space I've ever seen in my entire life. And it was pretty unbelievable. Also the amount of wildlife I saw on the Dalton Highway: black bears, grizzly bears, Arctic foxes, Arctic hares, Arctic wolves, moose, caribou, deer, elk, I think. And then like cool birds like cranes. And then like little rodent type things. I don't know what they were, like moles and voles or muskrats or something like that. The only two things that I really wanted to see in Alaska that I didn't see, and I still have never seen in the wild, are polar bears and wolverines. And I almost, when you get to the edge of the Dalton Highway, you're at a place called Dead Horse Camp, and it's an oil, like the reason that highway exists is because it's an oil field up there. So the whole time you're driving the highway, you're going you're driving along the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. And so when you get there, you can't actually drive right to the coast, right to the Arctic coast, because it's a restricted like working area. So, but they offer a bus tour to the public. So you take a bus to the Arctic coast, so you can jump in the Arctic Ocean wherever, say you did it. And so we were asking the bus drivers, like, do you see polar bears around here? And he said, oh yeah, we saw one like 2 days ago. And he said, like, they're not like, you don't see them all the time, but like, yeah, they're around. So I was really upset that I didn't see one at Dead Horse Camp in Prudhoe Bay. And then on the way back down the Dalton Highway, there's always road work going on, because it's this crazy gravel road, so they're always having to grade it and maintain it and whatever. So you get a lot of those construction workers holding stop signs, and you have to wait for a pilot car or just wait for something. So sometimes it's a long time in remote areas like that. Like, I think I was waiting for about 10 minutes, and I was the only car there. So there was a girl holding a stop sign. So I got out of my car just to say hi to her and whatever, because I'm going to be waiting there for 10 minutes. And she said, she asked me if I saw any wildlife, because I told her I wasn't from here. Like, it's the first time driving the highway. And I was like, oh yeah, I saw a moose and, deer and bears and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I didn't see polar bears or wolverines. And because I knew, like, before I left, I was like, those are the two things that I really hope I see, or two of the things that I really hope I see that I've never seen before. And she was like, oh my God, a wolverine just walked across the street, like right there, like half an hour ago. And I was like, you are kidding me. So I just missed a wolverine, and I missed a polar bear by a couple of days. So that was too bad, but yeah, it happens, whatever. Maybe next time. So yeah, that was definitely one of the coolest roads I drove, was the Dalton Highway. And then, actually, that was the coolest road. Like, that was my favorite road that I drove, was the Dalton Highway. And my second favorite road would probably be the Trans-Labrador Highway, going through Labrador. It's just like the most desolate, remote region that you can drive to in Eastern Canada. Like, it's unbelievable. The towns are like so many hundreds of kilometers apart. Half the road's paved, half of it's gravel, and it's the only route. Like, it's the only route through Labrador. They have one highway, the Labrador Highway. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. Not as much wildlife on that one. Lots of deer, a couple of moose. That was about it, though, I think. It's just such a beautiful drive, though. And it was also the first time that I had seen snow on the road. That was in October in Labrador. So, half the time I was driving it, there was snow on the road, and the other half, it felt almost like summertime. So, because it was in autumn. Yeah, I drove it in autumn. It was October. So, oh yeah, and it also has the only type of pine tree, I forget what the name is, the only type of pine tree that, like, loses its needles. So instead of everything being green, because most of it's pine trees, instead of everything being green, it's like half green and half yellow, which was really cool because those trees were about to lose their needles. So that was just beautiful, just amazing, incredible road trip. And that one takes 4 days to drive. Also the awesome thing about the Trans-Labrador is most of these like remote like road trip expeditions that people do, you have to drive there and you have to drive back. Like the Dalton Highway, you drive up to Prudhoe Bay and then you drive back. But the Trans-Labrador Highway, you start in Quebec, you drive through Labrador, it ends technically in Quebec because you cross over the border again, and then you can take the ferry to Newfoundland, which is what I did. So it's not like a there and back road, which is great. And it still takes 4 days to drive, though, or at least it took me 4 days to drive. You could probably do it in 3, but I wanted to do a couple hikes along the way and see all the sights and see all the towns, etc. Yeah, so that was my favorite, I guess that was my favorite road in Canada. But pretty much every road in like the northwest region of Canada, and by that I mean like I guess like the two roads going up through BC are Route 37 and 97, and then there's like the Alaska Highway going across the Yukon, and I didn't drive these, but like the Klondike Highway and the Dempster Highway up to the Arctic, which I still am going to drive someday. Those are like on my Canadian bucket list. The Dempster Highway for sure, and the Top of the World Highway. Anyway, sorry. Pretty much every road in like the northwest part of Canada, I would call a remote road. You know, like they're so much fun to drive because you're like the only person on the road most of the time. You know, it's a blast. Just ripping around corners and stuff and like taking up both lanes because there's no one else around. I love that feeling. I absolutely love that feeling. The Liard Trail, like the Liard Trail, for example, that's the only road connecting British Columbia and the Northwest Territories. I drove that. And even though it's not like the most exciting road because it's pretty straight and flat and there's not much scenery because both sides use just trees. So you're like driving a corridor of trees most of the way. It's still fun. It's still like a really fun road to drive because there's no one around. You're the only person. I love that. I just absolutely love that. Same goes for like some of the roads in the U.S., but not much because the U.S. is just much more populated. You know, like they're mostly in the desert, like in the American Southwest. There are some roads like that which are really fun. Yeah, a road that would have been really, really fun, actually, if it didn't have as many people, would have been the drive down to Key West. Because it's like Bridge Island. It's really, really cool. You know, nothing but palm trees and beaches and whatnot. But there's just so many people. In fact, we hit a traffic jam. I was with a friend at that point, and we hit a traffic jam on the way down to Key West, which is just frustrating as hell. So we were stuck for like an hour and a half or something around that. And then I guess, so yeah, Dalton Highway is my favorite road, then the Trans-Labrador. Number 3 would probably be the Pacific Coast Highway. I drove all the way from the Mexican border in California, like the intersection of the Pacific Ocean and the USA-Mexico border, all the way up to the northwest tip of Washington. Incredible drive. But specifically like the number 1 highway in California. Once you pass like the LA area, you get north of LA, and I think the best part of that drive is in between Los Angeles and San Francisco. It's just, you're right on the coast. You're on like cliffs and stuff, winding roads, because you literally like follow the coast the whole way. It's like you're following the curvature of the cliffs. It's so much fun. It's an incredible drive. Again, I wouldn't call that a remote road. Like there's lots of people on it. In fact, it can get kind of frustrating because if you're behind someone slow and they don't pull off for you, you're just like, get out of my way, because you can't pass anyone because it's such a windy road. But the Pacific Coast Highway is a blast. It's just unbelievable. That's a road trip I would recommend to everyone. The Dalton Highway, the Trans-Labrador Highway, you really got to be into road tripping. You got to be into like getting way out there, But the Pacific Coast Highway, that's a road trip for everyone. If you live in Western Canada or the Western United States, you should drive the Pacific Coast Highway. It's unbelievable. Let's see, what else? What else? 1 second. Would I do this again? People have asked me that question a lot, actually, like, especially since I've been home and I've been like seeing, friends and old coworkers and stuff, like just catching up with people. lots of people are like, they're amazed at what I've done, and they say, would you do it again? And the simple answer is no. And I love road trips. I'm going to go on many more road trips in my life. But would I do like the living in a car thing again? No. And that's not to say that I didn't love it, and I'm not super happy that I did it. It's just that everything that I think I could have learned about myself on this trip, I think I've learned, you know? People also ask me, like, do you feel like a different person after you've come back? And it's like, no, I don't feel like a different person, but there are things about me that have definitely changed. You know, I'm much more independent. Just simple things like that. But I don't think I would do it again, just because everything that I could have gotten out of the experience of living in a car, I feel like I've gotten already. Like, I got it out of that trip. I don't need to do it again, you know? Still, like, the experience of a lifetime. But I don't think I would do it again. Like, some people, you know, some people do this van life where they live in their camper vans, like, indefinitely. Like, they'll live for 5-10 years in a car. That's great. If I was gonna do that, I would probably spend my winters in Florida and my summers in California, and that'd be about it, you know, because it's tough. Like, living in a car, it gets tough. And I think the thing that always kept me going, like, kept me excited, was like, where am I going to be tomorrow? I was always on the move, you know, and I was never going somewhere that I had been before. And to me, that was the whole excitement of it. So no, I wouldn't, like, live in a van full time or anything. Well, at least I don't think I would. Like, I mean, I'm not going to rule it out as an option in the future, but, like, where my life's going right now, I don't see that ever happening. For me, this was it was, I lived in the car for the purpose of traveling, not for the purpose of just living, you know? Like, it was to see new things and have new experiences. And I think I've accomplished everything I wanted to, road trip wise, at least North America road trip wise, you know? So, yeah. So no, I wouldn't do this again. Next time I hope I get to do a big traveling expedition in the next few years or so. My next big one would probably be backpacking somewhere, not road tripping somewhere. You know, you feel comfortable road tripping in your own domain, like at home. You know, Canada and the United States, I know those countries, you know. I'm from North America, like, it feels comfortable, so I felt fine road tripping. Because you know the rules, you know the people, you know, like, if you get in trouble, you can usually get yourself out of a jam. But, like, I remember when I was in Thailand, I rented a car. And that was pretty scary, because, like, they have a totally different set of driving rules over there, you know, like, pretty much there are no rules. You can do whatever you want. And people are crazy, and, like, it's like, it was a really dangerous country to be driving in, just because of the lack of rules and the lack of following any rules that do exist on the road. So, like, in other countries, I would still, like, rent cars and go on road trips, you know, because I love road trips. Like, that's my thing, is road trips. But I wouldn't live in a car in another country. I'd feel uncomfortable doing that. Canada and the U.S. are the only countries where I would do that, I think. I'd camp in other countries, but I wouldn't live in a car. Yeah. Let's see. I think I have talked about everything I want. Oh, no. Okay, so lots of people ask me, like, how did your car hold up? Like, were there any major problems, or any, you know, any major problems? So I had 6 flat tires, None of them in a critical situation, luckily. I had a full-size spare with me and like a donut with me. Never had to use the donut, which was great. The holes in my tires would always be small enough that I could just like pump it up and get to a shop to patch it up for me. The couple times that I did have, I think twice, I had a big hole where the tire went flat like immediately. And then I just threw my full-size spare on there, and I never got two really bad flat tires. I had one flat tire that was like a big hole, so you couldn't drive on it at all, like you couldn't pump it up. So I put the full-size spare on, and then I got another flat tire, but it was small enough that I could just pump it up and get to a shop to patch it up. So I never had any critical situations with flat tires. I drove some incredibly bumpy, dangerous, rocky roads. A good example would be the Dalton Highway. And another good example actually would be this road that I drove in Joshua Tree National Park, which my running board fell off, and it really lots of the rocks screwed with like the bottom of my car. But my car always prevails. Like it always manages to handle whatever it's thrown at it. It's handled snowstorms, it's handled these crazy gravel roads, it's handled big rocks, big potholes. One thing that happened was, this was early in the trip, Northwest Territories. Some gravel kicked up, like I was driving a gravel road, and some of the gravel kicked up and like severed one of the wires. So my four-wheel drive kicked out, and it said like check ABS system. So my braking system wasn't fully functional, but it still worked, and my four-wheel drive was gone. And then I remember getting stuck at the bottom of a hill, which was also a gravel road, because I couldn't make, like the gravel was so loose that I couldn't make it up without my four-wheel drive, because my four-wheel drive was out. So like it took me like 7 attempts going up this hill, up and down this hill, to try and to finally get up. But I did it. I did it. Like I never had a situation where I had to call for help or anything, which is great. I got stuck in the snow once, severely stuck in the snow in Colorado, and I had to jack up all 4 tires one at a time and lay gravel underneath in order to get out. And I had to like hike half a kilometer to get the gravel and bring it back in like a cereal box, because I was in a really snowy area. I was in the Rocky Mountains, but I got out. I didn't have to call for help. I managed to do it myself. So my car held up beautifully, as far as I'm concerned. And whenever it had a problem, it was a problem that I was able to manage. So yeah, me and my car, we made a good team. Got through some tricky situations. Drove some incredible roads together. Had a lot of fun. It was home. Yeah, so I grew quite attached to my vehicle, and I'm gonna keep it. Since I got home, like I put, because when I was on the road, I had only two seats in it, and the rest was my bed and my storage and everything. Since I got home, like I cut the bedboard in half and put 3 more seats in, so now I have a 5-seater, when really my SUV could be an 8-seater, and it's still like a camper, because it still has the stove and the fridge in the back and everything, which is great. And I think I'm going to keep this car until I run it into the ground, because I love it. It's awesome. I can't think of much else to say. What are some other questions that people have asked me? What's the scariest thing that happened to me? Bear encounter when I was hiking in Northwest Territories. Not a grizzly bear, luckily, but a big black bear. I had my bear spray out and ready to rock, but I just yelled at it until it ran away. So that was probably the scariest thing that happened to me, because that's never happened to me before. By myself on a hike, seeing a big black bear. It just sat down on the trail and looked at me for about 25 seconds while I was yelling at it. And those were like some of the most intense 25 seconds of my life, because it's like, is it going to run at me or is it going to run away? It's probably going to do one of those two things, But but gladly it ran away. So that's the scariest thing that happened to me. Where did I meet the most people? In New York, I met a lot of interesting people. In Utah, I met some cool people, like camping, which was great. In Florida, I was camping a lot. I was picking up a friend at the Atlanta airport, and I had like 10 days to kill in between Miami and Atlanta. So like I went to the Everglades, and then I spent a while just like camping in Florida in the forest, because when I drove down, I was on the coasts, like, you know how Florida has like an east coast and a west coast. So I was like, you know, on the beaches coming down Florida. So on the way back up, I decided I'd stay inland and camp in the forest. So I actually met quite a few cool people in the Florida forests. So yeah, I met lots of people in Florida, met some cool people in Utah, New York City. Where else? Those are probably the areas where I met the most people, actually. Yeah. Another interesting thing about my car is I never had snow tires, but that was never a problem. Like, there were a few instances, well, the time where I got stuck, obviously, in Colorado, but there was a few instances where I was on the road and I would lose traction. But, you know, I'm a good driver. You just relax. You know, if you don't turn the wheel, you're not gonna like start skidding. So you just wait until you gain traction again before you touch the gas, and keep going. And like, I had 4-wheel drive and these all-season tires, and never really felt like I needed snow tires. You know, they would have helped in certain situations, but I never felt like they were necessary. Like, I could pretty much tackle anything without them, you know. Yeah, and there were other people, especially like in the northern states, because this is about like March, where there was like, it was winter. Like, my winter happened in March for the most part. Or like, I was giving people jump starts, I remember, in a snowstorm in South Dakota. Yeah, I gave like 2 jump starts and helped 4 people out of the snow. And I didn't have snow tires, and I was fine. I was like wondering why these people were having so much trouble. But yeah, and that was another interesting thing. I had like so many summers and winters. Like, I left in July, and so like summer lasted all through up like the north, like Alaska, Yukon, Northwest Territories, Alberta, and then I drove across the prairies. And I remember when I was in Ontario, so September, I pretty much spent all of September in Ontario, because I was doing like a trip with a friend up to James Bay at the start of September, and then I was meeting my brother in Montreal at the end of September, and some of his friends. So like, that's literally like a 2-day drive, right? But I had a month, so like I spent a whole month just like camping in Ontario. Every day was a different lake. It was so much fun. But I remember like talking to my family back in Calgary, and it was snowing in September, and it was like I was wearing a t-shirt and shorts every day, so that was awesome. And then I first saw snow in October, and then pretty much like all of November and most of December felt like summer again, because I was like in Florida. You know, like if I was in Florida in December, my hottest day was in December, 34 degrees. Yeah. And then like the American Southwest, I hit, you know, like January. Like, I remember spending New Year's in Texas, and then like I basically spent all of like January in the 4 corner states. So it was like New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado. And it was snowing. Like, I had never seen snow in the desert before, so that was actually pretty cool. But like it was cold, but it wasn't cold. You know, it wasn't like Canada in January. Like it wasn't even close to that. It's the American Southwest. So whatever. Like it didn't really feel like. It felt like winter. It felt like a really mild winter, I guess. And then February, it kind of got warm again because, well, it kind of was on and off actually because Nebraska was cold, Kansas was kind of cold, and then like southern Missouri and Kentucky were like not bad. I remember I had a bath in a lake in Kentucky in February, and it was like freezing cold water, but it wasn't like dangerously cold water, you know. I made sure to have my bath quickly, but like that was pretty awesome that it was warm enough to do that. And then it really felt like winter in March after I left Chicago and was going across the northern states, Minnesota, the Dakotas, Wyoming, and like Montana, like Yellowstone National Park. There was way too much snow to do any hiking, which was kind of a letdown, but as expected. So yeah, a lot of snow in the northern states. That's when it really felt like winter. And then I came all the way back down south to like Nevada, California, and then that's basically when summer started. You know, like March, like end of March, in not even. Oh yeah, it was like last week of March, in like California, was when it really felt like summertime, and I was going to the beach and stuff, and then it felt like summertime until I got home. Although it just snowed in Calgary last night, so wintertime again, right? There was one other thing that I just reminded myself of. What was it? So there was, people asked me like, did it feel very different being like, because it's the longest time I've ever spent in the United States. Did the United States feel very, very different from Canada? And there are lots of yeses and lots of nos there. Like, it doesn't really feel that different when you cross into the United States. You know, it feels generally the same. But when you're there for a long time, you do start to notice differences. You know how, like, well, maybe you don't know this, but if you're from Canada, people from Newfoundland are different. They have the Newfie accent. They're typically, seen as much more friendly. They're just like, they're Newfies, they're East Coasters. Similarly, in the United States, I would say the South, the Deep South, particularly like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, parts of Florida. It really feels like a different world down there. People are very different. It's very conservative. It's very Republican. People love. They love God, and they love their guns, and they love football. And they talk a lot about those three things: football, God, and guns. Which is fine. I'm not going to judge or anything, but I'm typically not a fan of any of those three things. So it was interesting being there because, I don't agree with any of the ideals really in the Deep South. One perfect example is the Creation Museum in Kentucky. Well, Kentucky, I don't know if you call it Deep South, but I think it's considered the South. It feels like a very, don't want to be mean here, but I hate to stereotype it. It's probably like the most hickish state that I was in. But like they had the Creation Museum there, where there's so many people that believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old. So that was like really crazy to be in a building where I felt like I'm pretty sure I was the only one that believed in evolution. Like that, to me, is a very backwards thinking place, right? And there were parts of Florida where, I'd be camping with people and Donald Trump would just come up, and they'd start talking about him, how much they love him. And like coming from Canada, it's like I never even hear people having that conversation before. So that's interesting, And then I have nothing against guns in general, because I like going shooting and stuff. Like, I've shot guns not many times in my life, but I always have fun with it. Like, I love skeet shooting, shotguns and stuff, you know. But the level of love that they have for guns in the Deep South is something else, you know. Like, they just love talking about, like, the Second Amendment, you know, and then they just, like, they hate anyone who just, you know, tries to take that away from them. Which is just, it's just a strange, it's just not the kind of people that I'm used to. Even if you're a conservative in Canada, you're probably more liberal than, like, half of the United States, you know? We're just a more progressive country when it comes to those kinds of things. So yeah, the Deep South for me, and I'm gonna say, like for me, most of these experiences happened in Florida and Georgia and parts of Texas, which I also don't really think of, like, geographically. I don't think of it as the Deep South. So yeah, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Kentucky, probably the 4 states that I had the most of these experiences in. Yeah, it's just, you know, like, gun in one hand, Bible in the other hand. If they had a third hand, they'd be holding the football. That's just how they live, you know. And again, I'm trying not to stereotype, but it was kind of shocking to me how many, like, of the people that I met there, which is not a lot, but it was some, how many people did think that way and were vocal about it, you know, weren't afraid to talk about those kind of things. Whereas, like, the northeast part of the United States, like New England, New York, etc., didn't feel very different from Canada, as far as, like, social norms go, what people talk about. And same with the West. California, I don't know. You can still tell, like, it's American, but it doesn't feel vastly different from just crossing over from Canada, you know. There are, like, little differences, obviously, like, you know, gas is in gallons instead of liters, and they have guns at Walmart, and everything, like, fast food's a lot cheaper, and there's just, like, there are things that are different about the United States, just general things that are just very different about the United States as compared to Canada. But the general feel it's not that different. In the American Southwest, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, I saw quite a few people at gas stations, rural gas stations, with, like, guns in their holsters, which is just something you don't see in Canada. So that was always a little unsettling to me. I don't like seeing people with guns. And then people, like, I was spending a lot of time in free campsites. So in the Deep South, like the Southeast, I would spend a lot of time at hunt camps, because hunt camps are pretty much always free. So I'd meet lots of hunters, even though I wasn't hunting. And that's great, that's cool. But man, they get a couple beers in them around the campfire, and they just love talking about their guns. Like, that's a thing. Love talking about their guns. Which is fine, you know. I wasn't like that. And that never made me uncomfortable. Like, when they're just talking about their guns, they would bring them out sometimes and show me all these, you know, their rifles and their pistols and stuff. I'm fine with that. It felt more unsettling to me when I would see people just walking around with a holster, because it looks like, you know, they're ready to go. You know, like, it's strange. It's a strange concept coming from Canada. There was one more thing that I wanted to talk about that I cannot remember. If I do remember it, I'll probably just film myself again and edit it in somewhere. But yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to talk about. Here's one more funny thing, actually, is Canadians seem to have a much better grasp of American geography than Americans do of Canadian geography. And that makes sense, because, you know, America is like a superpower. You know, it's like the most powerful country in the world, pretty much. And Canada's just Canada. So, like, you ask anyone around the world, who's the president of the United States, they probably know. Who's the prime minister of Canada? It would be like asking me who's in charge of the government in Portugal. It's like, I don't know, but I know the United States, and it feels like Americans should know Canadian stuff as well as we know their stuff because we're right next to each other. But in reality, we're just another country, and they're like a superpower country. So obviously I have a really good grasp of American geography now. But it's funny, whenever I meet an American and I tell them I'm from Canada, they say, oh, that's cool. Some people would ask where, and lots of Americans seem to know where Toronto is. And less, but still a lot of people in America seem to know where Vancouver is. But if you say anything but Toronto or Vancouver, I always say Calgary. Obviously, that's where I'm from. They just have no idea, which is kind of funny. But some people do. But whenever I meet people and I say, like, oh, are you from around here, or where are you from? They tell me the city. I can immediately think of a map and locate them on it. But when I say Canada or Calgary, most of the time, I'm going to say like about 75 to 80% of the time, they just think, oh, that's somewhere up there, beyond Montana. Yeah, it's just kind of the way that it is. I'm not expecting them to know Canadian geography that well because who cares about Canada, right? But some of them know Canada quite well, which is interesting. Yeah, I still can't think of this other thing I wanted to talk about. It'll come to me eventually, I think. I'll edit it in somehow. So yeah, if you were following my vlog, thanks for watching. I didn't expect to get many followers or anything. I was more just doing it for like my friends and family, and I always like making videos. It's fun. And it was something to keep me on track on the road. It'd be like a way to summarize my thoughts each week. But I ended up getting like 1,000 subscribers, so thanks for watching. That's cool. Yeah, if you have any questions, like I got, people will comment on my videos and say, oh, this is sad, blah, 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 you should do this in this place, or what's it like doing this? And I actually got more private messages than comments, people asking me like what it's like to live in a car. That was like the main topic of conversation was what's it like to live in a car? People that are probably considering decking out a van or something like that. I just tell it how it is. But if you have any questions for me, what it was like, or recommendations on places to go, things to see, things that I really found interesting in certain states, provinces, whatever, feel free to put a comment below this video, or send me a message or whatever, and I'll do my best to get back to you. It was fun doing the vlog thing, the only reason I did, I'm not a social media person. I have a Facebook account, but I never use it. And I've never, I'm not into the Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, whatever else, Tumblr stuff. I started a Facebook page and an Instagram page for this vlog, this travel blog or whatever, but I just stopped using them, and then I deactivated them because it was I don't care. I just can't keep up with it. But the vlog thing is fun because I like making videos. I've always liked making videos, so it's fun. So YouTube was cool. It was the first time I've ever done anything like this. It was a blast, I don't really care how many views I get or how many subscribers I get, but it's always fun making videos. It's a good time. So yeah, thanks for watching. Send me messages, leave me comments, do whatever you want to do. Yeah, much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed following me around the continent. I don't know how many of you actually watch all of my videos. I wouldn't expect you to, but if you did, that's pretty cool. Thanks. I know there's a lot of them. Initially, I planned for this trip to be an entire year. And it just so happened to end up being 9.5 months, which worked out just fine. You know, that wasn't like one of my rules. Like, my rules were no money on accommodations, see every state, see every province, see every territory, no haircuts, no shaving. I've obviously had a haircut and shaved since I got home. I'll show you the before and after picture if you want there. But yeah, there was just like, those were my set of rules, you know. It wasn't one of my rules to be gone for 365 days. It ended up being 281 days. I was totally fine with that because I did everything I wanted to do. And some people have also said like only 62,000 kilometers in that much time. And it's like, yeah, but that wasn't my goal. My goal wasn't to drive 100,000 kilometers, you know. There were times when I would spend 2 or 3 nights in a single place and not drive at all, just because I liked it. And that was the whole point of this trip, was to just do whatever I wanted to do, you know. Like the goal, like to see all the states, provinces, and territories was just a what's the word? That was just my mode of adventure, right? But if I found a place that I liked, I would stay there for as long as I wanted, and that was what was so much fun about this journey. And if there was a place I didn't like, I'd be gone the next day. And that's just, I could do my own thing, which was really great. There were a few states that I barely touched. North Dakota, I literally drove over the line. Arkansas, I literally drove over the line and drove back. I drove through New Jersey, and only stopping once, I think. Where else? I think that's it. Like, I spent one night in Saskatchewan and one night in Manitoba, because I don't really care about the prairies all that much. And I was trekking across the prairies pretty quickly to meet up with my friend to do the James Bay trip. So those I barely saw, but I mean, I've seen them before. I picked up a rock from every state, province, and territory. So I have like, that was my souvenir. I didn't want to spend money on souvenirs, but I picked up a rock from every spot, which is nice. So I have a big box of rocks now as my stuff from the road souvenirs. Yeah, I feel like I've said goodbye a couple times now, and thanks for watching a couple times now, but I'm pretty sure I'm done talking now. So one last time, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed my vlog. Yeah, send me questions, comments, whatever you want to do, and I'll do my best to respond. And that's about it. Thanks for watching.